I am Steve Etzler with Business Development Institute. BDI, established in New York City in 2001, produces thought leadership programs on the latest trends, issues, and opportunities facing marketers and communicators. I would like to first thank our speakers. Lee Acey, Director, Center for Social Media of the Mayo Clinic. Kelly Calabria, Senior Vice President and Group Director for Healthcare at Capstrat. Angela Connor, Senior Vice President Account Director for Media at Capstrat. And Brenna Robinson, Director, Global Reputation plus Digital Strategy plus Media at Pfizer. I would like to, of course, thank our sponsor, Capstrat, for making this webinar possible. And of course, a big thank you to you, our attendees, for investing your valuable time with us today. We have a very simple agenda. The webinar will run for 60 minutes. The first part will consist of a presentation by Angela and Kelly of Capstrat. The second part will be a moderated panel discussion with Lee of Mayo Clinic and Brenna of Pfizer. Angela of Capstrat will be the moderator. The last part will be a moderated question and answer session with you, the audience. We strongly encourage your questions, so please submit them through the GoToWebinar platform. For those of you on Twitter, we encourage you to use the hashtag #CapstratHC, as in Capstrat Healthcare, so we may all follow the conversation online. The webinar is being recorded, and we will make the recording available for download after the event. So with that, let's begin. Angela and Kelly?
Thank you. Hope everyone is doing well this afternoon. This is Kelly Calabria. I lead up our healthcare practice here at Capstrat. And Angela and I just wanted to talk a little bit today about some of the things we're seeing in content marketing, particularly as it relates to the healthcare industry. And I'm sure many of you on the call, on the webinar today, can relate to some of the things that we are going to be talking about with the world that we're all living in on a daily basis. And I think the one word that we all hear and experience is the word change, and how much change is happening on a daily basis to us, and we're experiencing it at all levels. But really, I think regardless of where you're falling or work within the healthcare system, whether or not you are a hospital system or insurance company, pharma, a medical device, there's a couple of things from our experience working with clients across the spectrum in healthcare that we're experiencing. And these three things kind of filter through what we're going to talk to you today about content marketing. The first is the need to simplify. The Affordable Care Act and all of its intricacies that it has introduced on top of working within a highly regulated industry has just really punctuated the need for simplicity. Particularly, I think, as we work to engage our audiences more, we have to find ways to simplify and explain with our content. The second thing that I think we're all experiencing and we're reading a lot about each time we read some type of publication is this notion of the rise of the healthcare consumer. We're really seeing these consumers are moving from patient status to consumer status, having more choice, and really demanding from all of us more of an experience with their healthcare. And talking with one of our hospital clients recently, they would say, if you asked me who my competition was even a year ago, I would have told you the hospital system down the street. Well, today we're having to think about Walmart and Walgreens and how they are really targeting consumers to make it easy and fast. So thinking about how we change our mindset around consumerism. And the third thing is how we are able as content marketers and communicators to get more targeted and more specialized with our content. You're going to hear Angela talk more about this when we all have this variety of audiences that we're trying to reach. These audiences can be found in different places, and they all consume content in a different way. So how do we navigate that and make sure our content really meets the needs of our different audiences? So we're going to talk to you about three things very briefly. The first is this notion of media convergence, where we can find our audience and how we can target them. And Angela's going to talk more about that. The second piece is content with a purpose. It's very easy to jump in and say, oh, we need an infographic, we need one right now. Well, are we sure we need an infographic? What's driving that infographic and really making sure we're aligning with our business objective? And the third is measurement, how we are showing and demonstrating as communicators the value that we're adding to the overall business that we're supporting.
Thanks, Kelly. So I'm going to quickly talk about media convergence, and I know that this is something that all of you have seen, the notion of paid, owned, and earned media, but it's really worth talking about a little bit more in detail, why we take this approach. Because it used to be that you could just maybe put paid media behind a piece of content and you know that it's going to get in front of everyone. But today, we live in this fragmented media environment, as you all well know, so we have to look at all three. And by paid media, of course, we mean media that requires a buy. You have to put dollars behind it. And then owned media, I like to look at that. Well, here at Capstrat, we say your media, your way, in your own space. So anything that you own. We're even talking about your social channel. Sure, Facebook's owned by Mark Zuckerberg, but if you can manage a page, that's part of your own content. And then earned media. And one of the things I like to talk about here is not just typical media relations, because we have typically thought about earned media as PR and getting the news organizations to talk about us. But earned media today is really every like, every share, every tweet, every retweet, every time someone emails a piece of your content or shares that infographic, that Kelly mentioned. That's earned media, so we want to acknowledge that as such. And then on the next slide here, what we're showing is that one of the reasons we want to incorporate all three is because each one has a weakness. You need to have all three to cover all of your bases. We're not putting our eggs in one basket anymore. So with paid media, it's highly visible, but the credibility behind that may be a little questionable. With owned media, one of the strengths is that you control it. And then your earned media, those third-party endorsements, the main strength of that is credibility. So there's sort of a push-pull here, but you really want to make sure that you are leveraging all three. And paid media doesn't necessarily mean, let's go put an $800,000 media buy behind this. It could be a $200 Facebook post, or it could be, buy, or it could be just putting some dollars on LinkedIn or just supporting a piece of your content with a small buy. So, when you look at that, that is actually paid media. It doesn't have to be big.
That's great. So moving from how we're seeing the convergence of media and how we're targeting our audience, one of the things we want to make sure we hit on is content with a purpose. Now, the slide you're seeing here is what we call our precision content marketing system. And for most of our clients, when we start talking to them about content and what we need to do, a majority of them really start in the middle, in this kind of yellow color here where it says what do you want to say. That's immediately where people tend to go to, we have to communicate X. What we would like to suggest to you is that we actually start with the why. And this again aligns with, as communicators, how we are supporting the overall business objective and holding ourselves and the groups within our organization that we support accountable. So why do you want to communicate? Are you looking to build more awareness? Are you trying to change perception? Are you trying to drive sales? So really working to put that stake in the ground. And then we move to identifying the who we want to reach will really help segment your audience so that you can target your messages and make sure that they resonate the right way. We want to really think clearly about who these audiences are, because that's going to, as we move through this, is really going to dictate the type of content that we use. And then that moves us to the what. We're kind of ready to say, what do we want to say? But I think the biggest thing to remember here is not so much about all the time what do we want to say, but what does your audience care about? Do they find your messages relevant and valuable? And are you offering insight, or are you just talking about yourself? So really thinking about your content, making sure it's not just built on your organization's agenda, but really the point that your audience is going to want to understand. So being really relevant content thought leaders, building a robust thought leadership program is all centered on being relevant and sensitive to the needs of your target audience. And then moving to the how you shape your content. Again, that's knowing your audience and the way that they're going to consume that media. If it's infographics or videos or a tweet, or maybe it is an actual white paper or a blog, understanding the right way you need to target them and getting that to them using the right media that Angela mentioned.
We found that, when you get the how wrong, things aren't going to work out too well, because if you don't know how people are consuming media and how and where they get their information, or where they even want to get it for that matter, anything that you create, it may fall on deaf ears.
That's right. And then the last piece of this is many of you probably have your sales funnel that you use all the time, and really thinking about your audience and where they fall within your funnel. And it's important to point out that not everybody's at the same place at the right time. You may have some audience members that you're just trying to build awareness about your organization. You may have others where you're ready to make a sale and convert them into something. So making sure your content, the type of content, truly aligns with where you know that audience is within the sales funnel. And the last piece on our three-pronged approach is measurement. And what you're seeing here is actually a tool that we have developed here at Capstrat that we use pretty much on every project or every campaign that we're working with a client on. And this one's obviously blank, but when they're put together and really working, I like to call these living organic documents, because working closely with our clients as partners, we're constantly making decisions about what's working and what's not. The most important thing to point out about this, again, is that it aligns closely with your business objective. That's really where we start, so that we're all crystal clear on what we are trying to accomplish, setting clear, measurable goals, and then taking our paid, owned, and earned media approach and setting our key targets to show how all of our collective efforts are moving that needle, aligning back to the business objective. And we hold ourselves accountable. We measure everything so that we can see what's working and what's not, and then we make real-time decisions, because I'm sure all of us can relate to the world we're living in with tighter, less budgets to work with. And so where we can maximize and optimize, we're really going to be using our budgets effectively and showing our value. So let's talk a little bit about a quick case study. Capstrat worked with a client, U.S. Health. They're a leading academic health system in Florida. When they came to us for some thinking about how they might rebrand, they were known as UF and Shands. The UF name of their brand was very much aligned with their academic health system research status. The Shands side was very much more of the clinical piece of their brand. And so we had to find a way to take all of those factors and come up with a succinct brand. And what we came up with was UF Health. And the reason we landed on that was because through the research and the rebranding process, we realized and it was discovered that the research component of their brand really was what helped differentiate them within their marketplace. So this notion translated into how we brought their new brand campaign to life. And really what this focused on were what we called invisible connections. So they had this great group of researchers who were doing groundbreaking, cutting-edge research. And what we did was connect that research that was happening to the real lives of patients and how they were being impacted. So you as a patient might not realize the great treatment you're getting at UF Health was a direct result of the researchers behind the scenes doing that work. So the brand campaign really hit on playing up those invisible connections.
And so then we had to think about, so how do we get this message out there? How do we share the brand? And we brought in our whole approach of paid, owned, and earned media. So, of course, we had some print ads, and we shot TV. We had TV running, so we did some production in TV spots. We used social media. We leveraged employees. But one thing I want to mention here is that what you're looking at is the TV spot on Facebook. So we repurposed the TV spot and shared it on Facebook, and some of the comments we saw that people said they had seen it for the first time on Facebook. So that just goes back to the notion of not putting all your eggs in one basket. You would think just because you peppered the market and got this TV spot on every station and had it running a lot, that a lot of people would see it. But there are some people who just don't get all their information from TV and all of their messages that way. So we saw that having it on Facebook and incorporating that own social and the paid social was really a good way to get the new brand out there. And we also engaged employees. I'll just go through this quickly. Using employees as ambassadors, giving them content to share and asking them to share across their social networks. And then just a great story here was the results that we saw in Facebook, and it was one of the leading drivers of engagement and people really sharing the brand. We really peppered the market, and we got in front of a lot of people here. And if you look at just the video views, I mean, that was the TV spot, but look at the reach that we got, 820,000 people. And again, repurpose. One thing we like to say with content is recycle, repurpose, and reuse, and we did that in this case, again, the paid, owned, and earned. And then I'm going to go through another one quickly. I know we all want to get to the panelists and hear everything that they have to say, because I'm excited to talk to them as well about social media. But here's just a look at how we work with a client on content. Now, when it comes to creating content, I know that you all are familiar with the challenge of reaching these varying audiences. We have, at any time, we could have 5, 6, 7, 8 different groups. And what works for one doesn't necessarily work for the other. So you find yourself slicing and dicing content in different ways, and sometimes you have to create content for one group specifically, and it doesn't work for others. So here is just an example of some work we did for Deloitte. We worked with a lot of their different business units, from the analytics to their federal practice, consumer and industrial products, human capital, and even life sciences and healthcare. So this is just 3 pieces of content that we broke out and segmented, smaller specialized segments. And then the infographic. We know that we're all visual learners. This was taking some complex information and just putting it in an infographic and sharing it. I know that many of you on this call use infographics and probably have some success with infographics, and we measure everything that we're doing. I know that Kelly talked about that third prong, which is analytics driven. One thing we like to say around here is that you can't manage what you don't measure. That's why that's so important for us. And this is also a poll that we did with Deloitte. When they released a mini book on big data, we actually went to LinkedIn and polled some of their primary audiences and asked them what they thought about big data, and got some really good answers. And this was a $35,000 media buy, but what we did was took the answers and made another infographic. So we used paid media to turn it into earned media, and we started the cycle all over again, the whole notion of recycle, repurpose, and reuse. And then one thing I want to talk about quickly here is with another group, with Deloitte Life Sciences and Healthcare specifically. The problem is not content. Now, for some, I know I go speak and talk to a lot of different people, and they say, we just don't have enough time to create all of this content, but this was not an issue here. They have more than you could even think about, from debriefs to studies, conferences, and other opportunities to engage. What we did with them is we gave them an organizing principle, because on the flip side, you can have so much content that you don't really know what to do with, or you don't have it organized in a way, so you're really missing opportunities. So as you can see here, we came up with ways to extend the reach of their debriefs and their studies and their conferences, and that's just listed there. You don't have to read everything here, but maybe if you grab this later, you can go back. But the point here is sometimes you just have to stop and organize. I mean, there is a situation where you may have a lot and you're just not using it. So stopping and saying, hey, we're going to get this right and fix it, and put some organizing principles behind it can really be successful. And the results, as you can see here, that was one approach for Twitter. And if you look to the left with the 12,000, that was before there was an organizing principle. And when we really started targeting that content and getting it in front of the right people, we saw that we got more followers, and they were really smart followers and strong leads for the clients.
Great. And so our last case study we thought would be interesting to share with you, because I'm sure many of you are reading all the time, and maybe some of you are even experiencing new collaborations that are happening within the marketplace. And this next example of Carolina Advanced Health is a great example of a collaboration. So UNC Healthcare, which is one of the leading academic health systems in North Carolina and the state's largest insurer, Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina, came together to form a new type of practice. Many of you might be familiar with the term patient-centered medical home. This is exactly what this is. I like to call it a patient-centered medical home on steroids, because it was even more advanced than the typical PCMH we see. One of the challenges, it was a great collaboration, great kickoff, did really well, opened the doors and thought, well, for sure patients are going to show up in droves, because this is just a great idea where they can get all of their treatment under one roof. Well, the challenge that we saw was that patients didn't come. It was a much bigger deal for patients to change their primary care physician than was anticipated. So they came, and we to Capstrat, and we really talked about how do we change this from being just known as a PCMH to something that patients can really understand and experience, back to that notion of consumerism. So we really had to strip away the complexity, which you see here, and morph their own properties into more of a recruitment tool, because what we did know from research is once patients experienced Carolina Advanced Health, they were true believers and would want to sign up immediately. So we had to not only work on our own properties, which you see some of that here, very welcoming, so they could understand the great technology and the benefits and the staff they would get, but we also had to work on the content that we used to attract patients to the practice. So one of the things we did, working closely with Angela's team, was develop a social presence for Carolina Advanced Health. One of the things we started to do was target patients with chronic conditions. So we used our Twitter handle as well to target community groups that were aligned with these patients with these certain type of chronic conditions. We went to community fairs, and we also hosted fairs at the Carolina Advanced Health. So that's using events, which is a form of content, also creating packets and toolkits for patients to have an experience once they were there and signed up. So at the end of the day, the campaign more than doubled the number of patients in the first 6 weeks, setting the practice on a path to reach its goal by year end. And it continues to do well, showing great outcomes as it relates to readmissions and ER use. So it's been a real great story, but having to use the right content to make sure we have the patient mix coming in was critical.
So that about sums up our portion of the webinar. We can't thank you enough. We know what it's like to have these webinars after lunch, and sometimes it's a little hard to stay engaged, but hopefully you have. Kelly and I are always happy to further engage with anyone here. So thanks for your time and thanks for listening. So without further ado, we're going to move into the panel session here, where we talk to Brenna Robinson, Director of Global Reputation, Digital Strategy and Media for Pfizer, and Lee Acey, Director, Center for Social Media at the Mayo Clinic. So if you guys are ready to shift gears, we're going to just jump right in. And I've got a couple questions for you guys. And feel free to
let's
share.
Go for it.
Okay. All right,
Yeah.
Brenna, I've got one for you. Let's start with goals. So, Kelly and I talked a little bit about goals and how important they are. Talk to us a little bit about what your goals are. Of the content that you're producing, what would you say is your primary focus? Brand awareness, lead gen, patient engagement, or something else? What are some of your goals?
Maybe she's muted.
Sorry, I thought that was for Lee.
Oh, that's for you, Brenna. Take it away.
No worries. Yeah, so I think there's two sort of main goals for us. And again, we're Pfizer, we're a pharmaceutical company. We don't, we can't really sell products via social media. So we have sort of different metrics. So we kind of look at it two ways. One is kind of the basic engagement and reach metrics, which means, if no one sees your content and no one engages with it, it doesn't really matter how good it is because no one can see it. But the second point for us is around brand awareness and reputation. So it's really important for us that the content that we make fits our reputational goals and represents Pfizer. And the way that I kind of say this is if all we do is focus on engagement and clicks and people clicking through, you're kind of in the cat video space, or even a step better than that, even maybe the quote space. You're kind of doing inspirational quotes or Happy New Year, and you can get a ton of engagement from that type of content on any platform, but how is that actually helping your business? And then you're all the way over on sort of the business education standpoint. You're kind of looking at a corporate press release, and from a content perspective, that's not that engaging. So we try to focus on kind of the center of that Venn diagram between what people are interested in and what we can talk about in kind of our sweet spot. So we feel like if we have one without the other, we're not getting the value that we need from our content.
Yeah, I'd also just add to that at Mayo, and I'd say this would apply for anybody, you need to start with what your organization goals are, what your organization strategy, the content strategy needs to match what the business strategy is. For Mayo, I work in Rochester, Minnesota, which is a town of about a little over 100,000 people now. and yet we have patients coming from every U.S. state and from about 140 countries, and it's been because of that, word of mouth. So part of what we're trying to do is online to fuel that word of mouth. So some of it is, we're not looking for everybody to come to us for every condition, but if they need a second opinion or a third opinion, that we want to be in their consideration set. So a big part of what we're doing is that awareness, but then we're also, with some of the content that we're producing, it's more targeted toward areas of the practice that we'd be interested in building. So we may do a webinar related to a particular disease or condition or subspecialty area. And with those, then we are looking at, are people clicking through and expressing an interest in an appointment.
Excellent. With Brenna, I thought about something that you said, and it sounds like you all completely recognize that all engagement isn't created equal, right? So that leads me to another question. I know that some healthcare marketers have a hard time getting beyond the regulations. Sometimes it's hard to really think about what you can do when you're so focused on what you can't do, and both you and Lee seem to be doing a lot. So how do you do that? And what would be your advice to people who are listening who are so caught up in what they can't do that they're doing nothing or they're just paralyzed? What's Pfizer's philosophy? Can you talk a little bit about that? And then maybe Lee, you can add.
Absolutely. So this is probably one of the things that I'm most passionate about when it comes to healthcare marketing or communications. I think we've kind of given ourselves the free pass that says, this is really tough, so we can't do it. And I think that's a complete cop-out. And I will get everyone on the line and say, listen, that's just not true. I've worked in a lot of different industries, and every single one of them has their own regulations and constraints. I've worked with CPGs, products that you would think top of mind would be just incredibly easy, right? You could write anything you want, not the case. There's always guidelines and stuff that you need to abide by. So I think, first of all, throw that excuse out the window. There is plenty that you can do and plenty that we can do, plenty that we do. So our perception is, in the way that we've gone about it, and I think a lot of times it seems overwhelming to get started, we kind of focus on here, and I think it's also really important to have good relationships with your legal and regulatory. Those in agencies, I totally understand that's a little bit harder because you're kind of a step removed, but I've also helped my clients sort of build relationships with their legal and regulatory in past lives. We kind of focus on what we call, I think of it like a stoplight, so 3 key areas. Meet with legal and regulatory and get the idea of, okay, what's green content or topics? What can we talk about all day, every day? That's totally fine. So you're looking about things around, engagement, kind of that lighter stuff that's really pretty friendly. Then there's that yellow zone where those things that we can talk about, but they're going to need more of a careful review. That's where most of our health content, if we're talking about a health issue or a topic, we're going to want medical to review them to make sure it's accurate. And then there's the red stuff, which we under no circumstance touch. And that's helped us a lot shape what we make more of, what we make less of, and saved us a lot of kind of pain making things that can't be used. I think also if you go to your sort of partners in those teams and tell them what you want to do, then you can work together on how you want to do it. I've had teams, I consult with a lot of brand managers here, and they'll come in and they say, we want to have this unregulated Facebook chat about blah, 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 blah. My first question is, okay, what's the goal here? Because I guarantee we can find a way to get it done. But you've got to think about what you want to achieve and then work backwards on how to achieve it. So my opinion is it's not a good excuse at all. We have a ton to talk about. If you go to Get Old as one of our consumer examples or Pfizer.com, we talk about health, policy, life, aging, all kinds of topics. We don't talk about our brands, but besides that, almost anything's fair game.
Yeah, I'd also just add on that we are blessed at Mayo Clinic that our attorney who helps us in these matters is personally on Twitter. And so he has his name is Dan Goldman, so if you want to follow Daniel G280, he's the guy. He really is helpful for us in sorting through finding a way to do it. I guess, as Brenna said, that there are some people whose first response is to throw up an objection like HIPAA or whatever, and they just say, well, they sort of wave that as a magic talisman to prevent something like this from happening because it's raising risk. But I mean, really, the philosophy is that you need to think about both risk management and reward management, and look at what are the opportunities that for which you can take advantage, and don't get hung up on what you can't do. So I think your basic philosophy there is very strong. And just by the other thing I'd say is that often people in the upper level of the C-suite, so you're talking about some of the agencies, may have ideas that they like to pitch to their clients, and their clients are having trouble getting through their compliance and legal. That's part of why we created our social media health network, as a way for people to hear from others who are engaged in this space, and all of them just sort of make our the fact that we've got our attorney blessing the things that we're doing, and people able to point to some of the examples of the things that we're doing, enables them to cut through sometimes some of the resistance that they might be facing internally, because they can say, well, Mayo Clinic's doing this, and I think people know that we're not, after 150 years, we're not a fly-by-night operation that's just not concerned about our brand or doing things the right way. And that does help. We like to think we provide air cover for those who are trying to take that hill.
And Lee, I have to say, I have absolutely used Mayo Clinic many times as an example. So yes, I forgot to mention that, but a lot of the examples, I think showing people do and how you want to do it, it kind of breaks that first barrier of it can't be done. Then you realize, oh, it can be done. How do we want to do it becomes the question.
Yeah, it's kind of like when Roger Bannister ran the 4-minute mile. Before that, it was considered that it was like, and I'm not making the analogy, although I just did. I realize that. But but the point is that people thought, oh, well, that just couldn't ever be done. And then once, now high school kids are running sub 4-minute miles, and it's just once you sort of break through that log jam where people are saying, oh, that just couldn't be done, then they start to. It opens up the creativity for thinking, well, how let's get this in our context.
Well, I think we've got two good takeaways from that. One, you want to make legal and regulatory your BFF, and then secondly, you can get your attorney to get on Twitter for starters, and so that's really great advice. This one is for you, Lee. The Mayo Clinic has a stellar reputation in terms of engaging in social media and cranking out a ton of content. So what advice do you have to our listeners today for getting started, particularly if they are a small team or have minimal resources and just feel like this is not something they can tackle? The content marketing mountain is just too high to climb.
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. That's something that I have a passion for as well, because I realize that when I talk about limited resources, it's coming from a different perspective than others. But when we started in this in 2005, we didn't have a team dedicated to social. We did have some people work media relations, and we just said we looked at ways that we could build on what we're already doing and maybe tweak it just a little bit to be able to capture some additional content. So, for example, when we were doing interviews for doctors and news releases, take a flip camera along and capture some video that would help, that could be used to pitch the journalist. Would be more effective if you're pitching to a TV show. It's good to the doctor's good on camera. But then secondly, that gives us a resource that we can use on our YouTube channel to reach directly to patients. So just even with when we would send the news release, to be able to link to the YouTube video or to a embargoed area section of video, provide a way for the journalists to be able to preview the story, and it makes us more effective in the pitching of stories when instead of just getting on the phone and describing it, you can actually show in addition to telling. So that's one element. I think the other part is, people say, well, I could never start a blog. How would we do this? And I say, well, do you have a newsletter? Yeah, and how often you publish it? Well, quarterly. And how many articles are? Well, about a dozen. Well, you can do a blog post a week out of each of the articles that you're already doing. And even if you want to wait until, on a quarterly basis that you're going to send sort of the roundup that is the current newsletter, the other opportunity you have is to add some rich media, add some things like video snippets from the person featured in the newsletter. I'd say just look at what you're already doing and see how you can build upon it with just relatively minor changes in your procedures that can get you a whole new set of opportunities for making that content available.
Okay. Brenna, let's touch on organization. How are you organized for success internally in terms of content and social?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would be lying if I said it wasn't something that we were still working on. I actually had a conversation, I spoke at a conference last week with the director of social from Walmart, and they just did this last year in terms of reorganizing. And I think even acknowledging the importance of social and content, restructuring a company is a huge business decision, or even a group in a company. So we're all kind of in the same place, I think, in realizing that we might have resources for web or social. Do we have the resources for overall content creation at the scale that we all want to do? It's easy to look at a company like Pfizer and say, God, you guys are huge. You should have all of these resources. And a lot of times we don't. And I think it's because we're split up in sort of a varied system. And so I'll give you the 1,000-foot view. We have business units that all report up into the CEO. We work in sort of the marketing and communications department that also reports up into CEO, but we're not with any of the business units. So it's not an abnormal arrangement, but that means that we can kind of be herding cats in terms of getting this story or getting that story. So what we have devised and are hoping to implement in the next couple of months, we're calling it kind of a hub and spoke model, so acknowledging where the main content creators and strategists here at Pfizer corporately. We'll bring in the different representatives from all the different teams. That means CSR, which could be over there making content. Even HR makes some content. The oncology team is working on a project, and at least setting up an ongoing meeting and processes so that we all know what other people are doing. And at the end, all the stuff that we make has a similar tone and voice and feel. I think a lot of us sort of think we don't have enough content, and the reality is we probably don't have enough good content. And if you look at the content, it's all really, really different from each other. So long story short, we're working on it. I know a lot of other companies are right now, and we hope that by devising sort of a loose structure where we're all connected, but acknowledging that we're not maybe all going to be part of the same direct line team, but implementing some of those dotted lines will help us streamline the process and make better content.
Yeah, I would just add, well, if I could just add one thing. I mean, we've just reorganized internally at Mayo Clinic into our, we used to have an external communications division as well as an internal communications division. And just bringing that group together where we had some people who were working on stories for our Mayo Clinic employees that were behind the firewall. And then we had our group that was external, that was obviously reaching out to the world. Sometimes we were working on the same stories. And that, by reorganizing to create essentially one news engine that's doing the content, doing a lot of the content production. My team is more, it's called the social and digital innovation team. So we're there to maintain the social platforms and also be scouting out what's new and what's next, and finding ways to leverage the content that our colleagues are creating. And then we have the media relations team. That's sort of the third leg of the stool to help maintain those relationships with the journalists. I think getting to what Brenna said, having getting the organization right is not necessarily easy, and there are all sorts of reasons why you might not be optimally organized. I'd also say, though, don't wait until you're perfectly organized to just start moving on some of this.
I want to go back to something that Brenna said, because I think that the listeners here can probably relate to the idea of having to herd cats. You know, when you
Yeah.
have a lot, you have a lot that you need to fill, and you don't necessarily have authority over any of these groups, or may not even be embedded in any of the business units, but you need a lot from them. Maybe just give us a couple tips for getting started, kind of building those relationships, since you have done some of that. And Lee, feel free to chime in here too, but just talk to us a little bit about getting started with that herding, because some people just give up, because we all know that's very hard in a big organization.
It is really tough, and I think to agree with Lee, the one thing that we realized we couldn't do is sort of sit and wait for all the stars to align where it would be easy. So for me, it's kind of it's a hearts and minds tour. I find if you start with one group that's the closest and the most excited and passionate, they're going to start getting really good results. They're going to make good content. Everyone's going to talk about it. And then before you know it, other people are kind of going to want to start joining that ship. So it's all about really showing the value to the business units to say, look, and sometimes it's almost like you're selling them, you know, bring back some of those agency skills. I definitely do, where I say, look, we've got this platform, we have all these eyeballs, it's an incredibly valuable resource. You know, what do you have that might be helpful for us? And then next time when they have a story or an idea or a project, they might come to you before they start working on something. And then that means that you can help shape what it looks like. The content gets better. You're always going to have some groups that are more advanced than others, but I really think even kind of the competitive nature you can play off a little bit in business units. You know, the oncology business unit doesn't want to be, you know, completely shamed by the vaccines unit, which have all this great content, and they're kind of throwing out bad tweets. So that I play a little bit with too, and say, look, this is a great example of what's been done. Well, do you want to do this? So I think it's a not something you do overnight. You don't kind of call everyone into a room and say, this is how it must be done, because I think that kind of attitude will just automatically push people away, especially if you know they don't have to do it, you say. And in a lot of our organizations and in a lot of companies, you need to work with people that don't directly owe you anything, but you still need to collaborate. So it's kind of a carrot and a stick approach. You know, you want to join this team, carrot, it's going to be a great opportunity. If you're not participating, you're going to lose some of the opportunities as well.
Yeah, I think it's great stuff. I don't really have much to add to that. That's a great philosophy.
So then, you know, Lee, you talked a little bit about restructuring, and you both agree that it's a huge business decision to even get there. What are some of the things that you can do to even start making the case? Again, I know it's a big undertaking, but to even start to show, hey, there may be restructuring is something we might want to think about, or we're not set up for this. Brenda, you just did a great job talking about how starting with a pilot program or one group and showing another group how well the first group did to kind of grow. Well, what can you do to show a need for some restructuring or some additional resources? Either of you can take that.
Oh, wow. I mean, I'll just say that when we created our Center for Social Media in 2010, we were able to show, you know, we had started out with the applying of social media in media relations, which was my day job. So you do you use these tools to do your work more effectively. I think as you're able to demonstrate effectiveness with that, we were able to make the case that, you know, it isn't just for PR and marketing that we should be using these tools. We should look at how we can use them within clinical practice and education and research. And we really needed a group to be in the catalyst role to help pave the way for others who are mixing metaphors left and right here. It's just great. Looking for ways that we can you know, make it easier for those who are interested in applying these tools themselves, and that there was a good rationale that we could make for helping people to do this in the right way if they're going to do it at all, because we were seeing an increasing, you know, appetite. So we did, you know, make the case and ended up getting 8 new staff members back in 2010 to help us, you know, be able to. We had one of them in Arizona, one in Florida, the rest based here in Rochester, but a team, you know, dedicated to helping Mayo Clinic do this as well as we could do it. And then also, again, it probably wouldn't have been quite as big if we didn't have that outward focus where we wanted to help our peers in healthcare too. but it, I don't know. I guess I'll also say that our CEO, Dr. John Noseworthy, was a very early believer in it as well, and where he had seen how this resonated with 150 years of word of mouth. So it enabled us to move into it and relatively easily, I guess, make the case.
Excellent. Excellent. So I want to move into, so we've talked about how to make things happen, and you guys shared a lot about some of your, not necessarily secrets, but how you've been successful. But what would you say are, Brenna, you can take this one first, and Lee, I want to hear from you on this also. What would you say are the short and long-term repercussions for creating content? So you have this content, but you have no real strategy or organizing principle, or you lack those goals, going back to what we talked about at the beginning. You both talked about clear goals, but what's going to happen eventually if you don't have any of this in place?
You're going to waste a whole lot of time and money. I don't know. Is that enough? Probably not.
Well, I think that's stressful enough. Yeah.
Yeah. You're just going to waste everything. I think you're going to get nowhere, and in fact, you might even go backwards because you might spend a lot of time working on things that could even detract from your overall business objectives accidentally because it seems like a cool idea. So yeah, if you don't know why you're doing something, probably in life as well, but in business too, you probably shouldn't be doing it.
Right, and I would just say that, again, there's a balance there that between the inertia of trying to have, you can get paralyzed sometimes from action by saying you have to have everything just right and the strategy has to be exactly perfect. I think that can be definitely an evolving thing. If what you're doing, again, aligns with what you were hired to do in the first place. In my case, it was we're telling stories about Mayo Clinic and using journalists as the intermediaries to help reach target audiences, to help spread the word. By seeing that using these tools was a way to do that work better, it was something where we didn't have to get a whole lot of external approvals from within the organization to do it. We could just take the initiative based on the fact that we had been given this responsibility to use this new set of tools to do it in a different and better and more effective way. Sort of at the end, it's kind of like when you shoot at the wall and then draw a bullseye around it to say, hey, we hit the target. I mean, there's some possibility of that happening. But if you are generally shooting in the right direction, it's relatively easier to steer. I use the example of getting a car that's abandoned at the side of the road or stalled at the side of the road going. If once you get a little bit of momentum, once you get a little bit of a nudge, it's a lot easier to steer the direction, steer it in exactly the right direction versus when you're at that dead stop. So I'd say don't wait until, Zig Ziglar used to say, if you wait till all the lights are on green before you leave the house, you'll never get out of the driveway. You do need to act, and you do need to appropriately, use these tools within your work and get that hands-on experience first. But then you do need to periodically take a step back and say, are we heading in the right direction, and are there ways that we can modify our approaches to be more thoughtful and strategic?
And I want to add to that, Lee. I think that's a great point. It is easy sometimes to say, and I actually heard a lot of people say, yeah, well, we can't really do anything because we don't know our overall strategy. And I think you don't need to pay an agency or have this huge elaborate goals and target audiences. But what you do need is sort of the road ahead, and I think, like Lee said, he knew he needed to share a story with an audience, and this was an excellent way to do that. If you've got a sentence that says we're in this to raise awareness of our brand or get leads or educate around a certain health issue, I think that's enough to get started.
Yep.
But it does have to, you have to have an idea of kind of where you want to end up, but we do sometimes paralyze ourselves by not knowing every stop along the way, and you're just not going to. And if you wait until everything's lined up, like we said, you're not going to get anything done, and certainly what you do is not going to be very interesting.
Dittos.
Okay. Well, I think that we may have some questions coming in.
We absolutely do. Great job.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Brenna and Lee. I love chatting with you guys. I'm probably going to call you for my personal reasons. So it was great chatting.
Sounds great.
And we'll let some other people get your time now.
Hi, everyone. It's Steve again. So let's get right into some of the audience questions. Thank you, audience, for submitting some great questions. This one is from Adrian. What are common challenges you face when creating and disseminating video content? For either one of you.
Well, I'll just jump in quickly and say that we had at the beginning kind of a bias toward it has to be completely professionally produced content. We do have a great, internal video production group, and so there was sort of the thing that if it isn't, completely studio quality, we shouldn't be doing that. And the reality is that there's some content that would be valuable to niche audiences that if the niche isn't big enough to spend, to send a $25,000 camera and an extra person to shoot the video. So we worked through some of those challenges with using consumer grade cameras, and we just set a target that we wanted our YouTube video, for instance, to be better than 90% of what is on the web. That it needed to avoid things like an open window or even a closed window in the backdrop that would make someone look like they were in the witness protection program. Just some basic principles that would enable smart communications people to be able to shoot reasonably good quality video that would meet a need for the target audience.
And again, as always, I totally agree with what Lee said there. It's finding that balance between big production and someone's iPhone, and you kind of tend to get one or the other. The second thing that is a big trouble, I think, is either a promotional or distribution plan. It's really great to make a lot of great videos, but I can't even tell you how many times I've talked to either clients or colleagues that come and say, I put all this money into this great video and no one's watched it. And it's just not enough. If you build it, people will absolutely not come. So how are you driving eyeballs? Who are you sending it to? Where are you posting it? That's probably more important than the video itself.
Thank you. Our next question is from Jim. How do you determine the content your customers will find most interesting and compelling?
You want to go first, Brenna?
Sure. Well, we try to do this two ways, right? So the first is traditional research, where we do large research with some of our audiences to see the topics that they're interested in, do even some small focus groups. We do this once a year, so it'd be great to be able to dive in all the time, but at least to give us a big picture of where we're strong, where we're weak, and what do we want to talk about. And then on the granular level, we measure our posts. We measure the content. We know what's engaging. And then hopefully between the big picture, what topics our audience is interested in, and the small picture, what people are actually engaging with, we can put those two together and kind of tell a story about what we want to do. Second is test. Just test stuff. I can't encourage it enough, right? You never know what's going to be a home run sometimes until you try it. So smart but frequent testing, I think, is a great way to find out what works as well.
Mm-hmm. I'd just add to that a lot of the content that we're creating, or actually most of the content we're creating, comes from an advocate, comes from somebody who's a specialist in some disease, who has a passion and interest in communicating that to the world. And so it isn't so much audience research that we're doing, because there are, if you're familiar with I'm trying to remember the show with Mr. Burns, The Simpsons show. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, The Simpsons show where Mr. Burns went to Mayo Clinic and they found out that he had every disease known to man, and they were all in perfect balance. There are like thousands of diseases you can have, as it said in that segment, and so we can't. There's certain content that we're going to create that's not going to be relevant to a great majority of the people, but it's going to be highly relevant to a very targeted group. And so, as Brenna said, part of it is enabling that targeted group to find it. And some of it might be promotional advertising. Some of it might be linking with online patient communities that already exist, and getting that content shared there appropriately. So, to some extent, we're not basically a public health agency. So we're, for the most part, focusing on diseases that people already have, and how are they going to seek, diagnosis and treatment options. So, we do want to measure and learn from the kinds of content that we create, and is one hashtag good, 2 hashtags good, 3 hashtags we find out is way too many, and that you reduce your engagement with that. So we want to learn little ways to tweak it, but in terms of the basic content, a lot of that comes from who our subject experts are and what they want to be able to communicate about.
The next question is a fun one from Talia. What is the dream product that a startup company dealing with health behavior change could bring to you? I guess another way of asking that is, what's your biggest problem?
Well, I mean, and I'll start this, but certainly in the care space, Lee's going to be closer to it. Health behavior change is really, really hard. It's been incredibly difficult to actually prove health behavior change. People know they have health conditions, and they still don't make the behavior changes a lot. So if you could prove that if you had some sort of, and I love technology, I've worked in that too, so is there some sort of integrative technology beyond some of these wearables that really not only let people know where they are on the scale, but somehow encourage them to make difference? Is that a gamification? People have tried that a lot, and it hasn't worked. But how do you combine technology to actually influence behavior change? And is there a way, either institutionally or at a governmental level, that we can reward that? So that was my crazy answer to an interesting question.
Yeah, and I guess I would say, creating the want to. It's the whole readiness to change scale, and in some of our health risk assessments, we're measuring that. But you really can't. I mean, what do you do to create that, to increase that readiness to change? That's huge.
It looks like we have time for one more question from Andrew. It's really a two-part question. What tools do you use to measure success on social media, number one? And what KPIs would you like to measure that you can't right now through these tools?
We use the insights that are built into the social platforms, which are getting better all the time. It used to not have much on Twitter within the native Twitter platform, but that's even getting better. Clearly looking at things like engagement and people sharing and liking and commenting, favoriting on Twitter. We look particularly at clicks on shortened links. So we have a custom shortened domain, the mayocl.in domain on Bitly, which gives us, and with the end-to-end branding that we have, it means that anytime anybody shortens one of the links using Bitly, it gets our custom branded shortener, which we've found increases click-throughs by about 50% because people are trusting it and knowing that it's not spam. They know there's not malware on the other end of it, so that's really helpful. The other thing, so it kind of depends on the kind of post that we're doing, and we find that there are some posts that get a lot of engagement, a lot of retweets, and then there are others. We did one on fingernail, six signs, possible danger signs on your fingernails of diseases that could be there. Well, we got no retweets on that. I mean, nobody's wanting to tell the whole world that they're interested in their fingernail issues. On the other hand, the click-throughs were huge. That we got a lot more click-throughs, probably 3 times as many click-throughs as on some other posts, because people were curious about what diseases could be shown by the condition of their fingernails. So it's a matter of what you're interested in knowing versus what you're interested in sharing.
And I'll just go Yeah,
go
I'm
ahead.
going to go quickly or no? We use
Sure.
posting. We use a tool that tracks our posting. We do social. We do Google Analytics, obviously, and together they tell us the story. We also do listening. But the one thing that I'm still working on, and maybe I'm going to quit this job and come up with it, is a way to prove, in a sense, the true ROI of social when it doesn't come directly to sales. It's a lot of pieces, but how do we show that engagement and things like that are actually changing people's perception of us, that's resulting in business development? So tough one, but I would love to be able to do that.
Well, that's a subject for a whole new webinar, among other things.
It
And
is.
with that,
It is.
we have run out of time. So I wanted to thank our speakers, Lee Acey, Director, Center for Social Media, Mayo Clinic, Brenna Robinson, Director, Global Reputation, Digital Strategy and Media for Pfizer, Kelly Calabria, SVP Group Director, Healthcare Capstrat, and Angela Connor, SVP Account Director, Media Capstrat. Of course, the biggest thanks goes to you, our audience. Thank you for spending the last hour with us. We hope you found the program worthwhile. We hope to see you again. Have a good day.